they lost the ability for it to give them direction. Without its guidance, they usually find someone or something else to lead them by the hand. But what about the endings? You may have noticed that I skipped over some of Grace's guidance. The last guidance of Grace has to do with the endings that Marika wants, and the endings she doesn't want. The one she doesn't want is pretty clear. It's the Frenzy Flame ending. This is the only ending that Melina begs us not to do. And if we do go through with Chaos, take the wall! If she is available, Melina will look you in the eye and promise to deliver what is destined death. The death that all mortal men are destined to die. In Caelid, Grace actually has a brand new path. Not only will it point us towards Radahn, it also points us towards Millicent, one of Elden Ring's most beloved characters. By following Millicent's questline, you might find yourself at the Shaded Castle, getting your hands on a prosthetic arm. Desperate to know what happens next with a spoken rotted warrior, you could end up in the village of the Windmills, fighting a Godskin apostle. Eventually, you might find Grace honing the soul for one half the Halid tree mechanic, and having one half is all you need to search for the other. Grace doesn't really need to compel the Tarnished anymore at this point. There are characters who ask for your aid, mostly young women in need of a strong arm and a big sword. Or the pull of curiosity, a bewitching force all on its own. By following Grace and assisting Millicent, we can end up with Miquella's aid, so that in the event that our Tarnished does take the flame, the event can be undone, and we are free to choose a different ending for the game. As for the other endings, Melina doesn't seem to have a preference what you choose, but Grace does. Grace points us to another demigod. It points us up towards Caria Manor. She was the demigod who orchestrated the Night of the Black Nine, the beloved god when the Golden was ascended. This plot would be the catalyst for the rise of those who live in death, the destabilization of the lands between, the return of the Tarnished, and the war known as the Shattering. Unlike the other demigods, you can't harm Ranni in any way. You can only help her, even if you side with Seluvis. Preceptor Seluvis is supposed to be one of Ranni's trusted warriors, except he harbors a secret. Seluvis is into puppets, and not the dolls with strings, but the magical act of enslaving one's soul for eternity. We can find his hidden chambers where the near-lifeless bodies of men and women are strewn about. When a puppet has their strings cut, they slump to the ground in a lifeless pose. They aren't dead, but this is no life anyone would want to live. If we indicate to Seluvis that we may also be into puppets by purchasing 2 paramours, he will let us in on a scheme to enslave Ranni. Although Ranni's soul is housed in a doll, she's not willing to be anyone's puppet. Whether you go through the scheme or not, Ranni will have Seluvis killed in retaliation. Well, not Seluvis, but Pydia. See, Seluvis was a puppet the whole time being controlled by a Carian servant, their master of puppets. And Ranni the doll knew the whole time. In a George R. Martin story, sometimes puppet masters are puppets themselves. After doing Ranni's bidding and helping her reach her goals, becoming Radahn and retrieving the Fingerslayer blade, she will leave her tower, and Grace will appear in her place, pointing towards Renna's rise, pointing you to follow after Ranni. Following Grace, we can find Ranni as a miniature doll, and if we're persistent enough, she'll put us up to one more errand, eventually rewarding the player with a discovery access to the Dark Moon Wedding Ring. With this ring, we can continue fighting all the Remembrance bosses and collecting all the legendary weapons to achieve the achievements. I mean, this very Ranni Age of Stars ending, the most popular ending in the game. In a Reddit post made a year ago, user This doesn't even account for the top comment by advanced song rather than the default. The store photographer replied. What is so interesting about Ranni is that she did not want to be controlled by the 2 fingers. She didn't want to be controlled by that thing. In an effort to fight for her own bodily autonomy, her own imperial flesh, she was a puppet. In my last video, I presented the theory that the dragon, Veiled in Dread, is actually a silver I provided the similarities and alluded to the reasons that destabilized the Society of Ancient Dragons. Check out that video if you're interested. I mentioned that you should trust me. All of your dragons from Fire has a similar name to Bales, Valerian the Black Dread. Some people didn't like this thing. It cheapened Bale's story that his rebellion wasn't his choice, that being a copy validated who he was and what he did. And I think people felt that way because I expected to talk about the faceless men in the song. See, the faceless men used to be slaves to the dragon. Some theorize that they were enslaved for eternity by being turned into fireworks. Unable to die, the slaves would all pray to their own religion's god of death. It is said that the first of the faceless men heard the prayers of the slaves to their various gods and concluded that they all prayed to the same god with 100 different faces, the many-faced god, the god of death. This led to the giving of the first gift to the most desperate slaves, the gift of death. Eventually, they would give this gift to the Valyrian masters, to the Dragon Lords. Some Westerosi scholars believe that this was the cause of the doom of Valyria, a volcanic cataclysm that destroyed all Valyria and killed nearly all of their dragons. That these faceless men brought about the destruction and end to the once great empire of Dragon Lords. Now, the Faceless Men operate out of the House of Black and White, located in Braavos, a city made from escaped Valyrian slaves, and they can be hired as assassins to take down high-profile targets. The Faceless Men are called such because they have the power to change their faces. They can assume the identity of anyone they've killed. They can mimic those that they have given the gift to. With a power like that, who knows who they could be masquerading as? Who knows how they could be manipulating those of Westeros and beyond? In the current day of A Song of Ice and Fire, they are training young Arya Stark to become no one, to become one of the Faceless Men. You remember how Stark, from the beginning of the video, how Ned Stark was manipulated into leaving his wife to go to King's Landing, how he brought his daughters with him to the capital? Well, while at the capital, Arya is trained in sword fighting. See, her father found that Arya had a sword of her own, forged by the Stark royal blacksmith, a slender sword called Needle. And to make his daughter happy, he hired a teacher for her. Her teacher would be Syrio Forel, a former first sword to the Sea Lord of Braavos, and he would teach her the sword fighting technique called water dancing. Eventually, Arya joins the House of Black and White, and she is trained by the Faceless Men. And in the show, she uses her training and a magical dagger to slay the Night's King, the head White Walker who can raise the dead. Now, what the hell does this have to do with Elden Ring, the Nox, or even Ronnie? I don't think I need to tell you that from the Wolf Crest shield, we learn that the wolf is the beast that symbolizes the Carian Royal Covenant. I may have to say that the sigil of House Stark is a dire wolf, though. You already know the Carian Royal Blacksmith forged a slender sword called Frozen Needle. Everybody knows that Ronnie had a secret mentor who taught her cold sorceries. It's common knowledge that Ronnie was the Black Knight Assassins, a group of faceless women who imbued the rune of death into their bodies so they can assassinate Godwyn the Golden. And this manipulation caused the Shattering Word, the spreading of Deathroot and those who live in death, and the return of Tarnish, and all the events that lead to the burning of the Third Tree. You don't need anyone else to explain over and over again how long ago the Nox invoked the ire of the Great World and were banished deep underground. That now they live under a false night sky in eternal anticipation of their liege. I still get comments like this that your own but the whole story is that they failed. Original. Right. In the Frenzy Flame, Marika's body crumples into dust as the world around her is destroyed. In the Elden Throne endings, Marika is broken and fractured as the Elden Ring is housed in her body. But in the Dark Moon ending, in the Nox's coming age of stars, Ronnie lifts up Marika's head, and then she dissipates into golden dust. Most players brought about this coming age of stars. Most became Ronnie's Lord of Night, and Grace led them. Have you noticed that at every single site of Grace in Elden Ring, there's these small roots growing beneath them? Every site of Grace but two. The one located at the Table of Lost Grace, and Grace mimics. Similar to Grace, this fetish draws Rays guiding the way, only without any sense of order. It's not really Grace, it's just mimicking it. The two fingers at the Table of Lost Grace were shocked to learn that one who followed Grace was spurned by the Earth Tree. They locked up and froze in an attempt to prevent her. How come they didn't know? Found in the Land of Shadow are these light pink mushrooms that resemble wizened fingers. They are used by those who wish to become fingers to induce hallucinations. They call these mushrooms the stillborn of the two fingers, but the game calls them finger mimics. The Nox didn't fail. They just needed to mimic A Song of Ice and Fire. They used mimics to manipulate you. If this was really your choice, to summon Ronnie at her dark moon, why'd you do it? Was it because Ronnie gifted you the spirit calling bell? Was it because the game almost led you to this ending over the default one? Was it because nearly 40% of the game is locked behind Ronnie's questline? Was it because when Melina greeted you at a site of lost grace, she looked you in the eye and offered you an accord? You chose to follow Grace and take her to the Earth Tree. When that failed, you were led to the Forge. Before Melina finally says goodbye, she looks down at the chart, her attention to you. That's right, she's looking at you. Was it because when you reached the end of the game, after all was said and done, the only was left for you and the dog? When you reach the Gate of Divinity, Miquella addresses our target.
My lord blade, champion of the festival. Both your deeds will ever be praised in song.
In order to even get to this point, you need to play some part in Miquella's plan, whether you want to or not. You need to fell Radahn and send his soul to the Land of Shadow. You need to kill Moog so his body can be used as Radahn's vessel. After Miquella's defeat, once you slay the eternally youthful and ever-bewitching god, all of his followers and enemies will be overrun. Tolier, Ansbach, Letta, Dane, Frey, and more. After Miquella is gone, no one is left to play with them. They remain lifeless. No one feels direction. The lands between is a little more empty now. All that's left at the top of the world is you. And your public.
What the fans have to keep in mind, and I hate to say this because I sound like I'm attacking the fans. I like the fans. I'm a fan myself. But we're making this shit up.
Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, consider liking and subscribing. After all, it's your choice. See you in the next one.
is it thy... Now... into... Martha.
Elden Ring is a game that's designed entirely around payoff. Inspired by and spiritually succeeding its studio's former hits, including the critically acclaimed Dark Souls, Elden Ring's gameplay stays true to From Software's time-tested Souls formula of rewarding exploration with challenge, forcing players to adapt to fighting foes which will feel impossible at first, but through practice, patience, and careful play can be learned and eventually overcome. This recurring dynamic of facing some larger-than-life challenge, learning through failure, and eventually conquering that challenge is the bread and butter of what a Souls game is. But something that might not be immediately apparent is that this formula is not only present within the gamified parts of the experience, but also in its diegetic elements, its world building, its characters, and its lore. Understanding the world of a Souls game is just as much of a battle as mastering the actual tangible fights. Part of what makes these titles remarkable is how they present a story that can only really be told effectively through the medium of video games. Nowhere else would such a presentation style actually work, at least not to such great effect, much less actively being conducive to a gripping, emotional, and occasionally profound set of stories that I, for one, would consider to be on par with some of the greatest and most engaging fantasy works offered in other forms of more traditional media. But this comes at the cost of both complexity and obscurity. While the whole of the Souls games, and Elden Ring perhaps most of all, is chock full of great aha moments for players paying close attention to the storyline, the natural process of stringing the player along results in the endlessly fascinating, if not occasionally irksome practice of supplying an answer to one mystery while predicting new ones, which has resulted in people asking a small number of derivative questions that may or may not seem like they're ever going to be satisfied. But with the recent release of Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, the player base of this game's residual mysteries would be revisited, at least in some capacity. But none probably would have guessed that the DLC would answer as many questions as it has, nor the sought-after, possibly world-altering lore would be revealed in a single, entirely separate question. Those who have played through the events which take place at the Cathedral of Maidenless will know that this is a very special part of the game. Not only do the characters and setting create an atmosphere alien to what we see anywhere else in the DLC, but in addition, I can't think of a single other quest which reveals the answers to as many mysteries, especially not as long-standing and pervasive ones as are addressed here. And for that reason, I thought it would be worthwhile to go over the full story of this quest with all of you, not only revisiting all the vibrant areas and assembling the pieces of this great puzzle together, but also taking the time to really ruminate on some of the remarkable findings therein, as well as their deep-seated implications to the rest of Elden Ring's story. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why is it necessary to walk through this quest? Couldn't I just play through it on my own? And the answer to that is an emphatic yes. In fact, I would highly encourage it. My intention with this video is not to rob anyone of a first playthrough, nor to simply retell a story which has already been told simply for the sake of it. Instead, what I'm hoping to do here is to dissect the wealth of information presented to us over the course of this short journey, and to offer some context to a number of points, because ultimately, the information within this questline is pivotal to understanding the very genesis of the lands between and all of the events of the game. So for that reason, I think it's important for just about anyone who's even somewhat interested in the lore of Elden Ring to fully understand what's going on here. And in the process, we're finally going to shed some light on some of the most long-standing mysteries and closely held secrets that Elden Ring has to offer. Once again, if you haven't played this quest and have any inkling that you may want to in the future, I would recommend that you don't watch this video until you've gone ahead and run it through yourself. I would hate to rob you of experiencing this firsthand, but if you've already completed the story, you probably have at least some questions. So without further ado, let's get started uncovering the many secrets of Menace Metter, the most revealing questline that Elden Ring has ever had. Shadow Altus is a vast area of the Land of Shadow. It encompasses many prominent points of interest that include a number of ruins, villages, forts, and catacombs, with its most prominent and narratively significant location likely being the Shadow Keep, the seat of Messmer the Impaler, one of the most infamous and powerful figures in the entire DLC, who the Tarnished will need to face in order to challenge the great Mikola and his consort. But in spite of the vastness and variety of things to do in this area, one really cannot explore the majority of Shadow Altus in order to complete the main objectives of Shadow of the Erdtree. Most of this place is full of purely optional content, and it also is a very disjointed location, with significant swaths of land separated vertically as well as laterally, so those who ride through it will be accustomed to seeing distant locales far below them out of reach. And one such location is right here. This spot is one of many across both the Lands Between and the Lands of Shadow, which feel like you ought to be able to get there just by jumping down in the right spot, but prove what, in the back of our minds, we already sort of knew. It's just a bit too high. He sort of knew. It's just a bit too high to get down there without dying. Still though, there should be a way to access this town, and as it turns out, the way to do so is through the ruins of Morth, a place which evidently used to be a hamlet or town of some kind, but over the course of hundreds of years, the ground seems to have given way beneath the buildings, pulling them down into the cavernous depths below. With some careful exploration, there's a path that we can take down into the subterranean areas here, but it's something that, if you're not paying attention, is easy to miss, causing you to end up hurling yourself off of embankments like me. As it turns out, these tunnels are one of the only ways to access the entire eastern side of Shadow Altus, but you might not think so based off of their grandeur, or lack thereof. All in all, these modest passages aren't much to look at, but they offer a sense of quietude, providing some physical separation between the story playing out behind us and the one that's about to unfold, which begins at the very place where these tunnels terminate, Bonny Village. Now, Bonny is a weird location. From the moment you arrive, it becomes clear that the locale is heavily linked with the age-old struggle between the Hornsent and the Shamans. This is a persistent theme throughout the DLC's campaign, as the subjugation of the Shamans is actually the process which led to the creation of the Living Jars. This is something that you may have first learned from the Belarut jail, but there's something particularly unsettling and cruel about what Bonny Village tells us about this age-old practice. Seeing the remnants of such gruesome work strung up against the backdrop of the Shadow Tree imbues the small town with a unique sense of horror. Until now, the jarring of the Shamans has taken place underground, or in areas cloistered away from prying eyes. But to see the whole village overtaken with it, while the remaining spirits of its population demonstrate such little remorse for their macabre work, definitely causes us to reconsider the true depths of the Hornsent's cruelty. Luckily though, we needn't stay here long. A bridge to the east of the town leads away from the accursed village, but before passing through, one might stop to marvel at the shed skin of a massive snake shaded amongst a grove of small trees to the north, hidden even from the direct light of the moon. It's perhaps no coincidence that this skin shares the same texture as that of the great serpent which devoured the demigod Rykard atop Mount Gelmir, but what the skin is doing here of all places is unclear. Another strange finding to the north is a small bent tree, beneath which a beheaded corpse sits prostrate in an unfamiliar position, and by walking up to the corpse, we'll receive the ability to assimilate the gesture, which we learn to be called O Mother, a clear reference to Queen Marika. From here, we set forth over the bridges, on the far side of which lies the Whipping Hut, Bonny Village's most isolated building, inside of which can be found a cruel implement of torture and another spirit with more evidence of the atrocities committed here. Continuing on, we find ourselves upon a winding path, where the only way forward is haunted by great wolves along with a lone furnace golem, a massive war engine left behind from the crux of the Great Crusade, further invoking the horrors of a bygone age in this land's history. We evade both of these threats and eventually find ourselves at a site of grace, just beyond which lies a crossroad. To the right, we can see a massive stone tunnel carved into the side of a mountain, and to the left, the path winds in on itself, cutting through yet another grove of trees, shielding from view that which sits at the top of the cliff that we've just come around. From here, we veer left, abandoning the trodden path toward the southern road, where, cutting through the tree line, a building reveals itself. In front of us is a massive cathedral made entirely of stone, overgrown with vines and moss, in spite of its relative lack of structural disrepair. After seeing so many ruins and shattered dwellings on our journey so far, it's certainly a welcome sight, and heading inside this place, the Cathedral of Menace Metter, a site of grace, patiently awaits our arrival amidst rubble and upturned furnishings. After taking a moment to rest, we notice a closed gate, which separates the entry hall from the back half of the structure, and upon trying it, we find that it can be opened with ease. Inside, rows of benches face forward to the far wall of the church, and here, among topples, candelabras, and other variable debris, a man in the center of the hall sits in a chair, on which is seated a figure adorned in navy blue robes. The man says nothing as we approach, waiting patiently as if he's expected our presence for some time, which only adds to the sight of him in the center of the church, illuminated only by pale emanating from the candles at his feet. We figure this must be a man of some importance. Why not speak with him?
We don't often receive. Welcome to Manus Meta. It is a pleasure to have you. In my forsaken as chance encounters are here on this day, and
He then hands us two key items, the hole-laden necklace and the ruins map, both of which shall prove their importance momentarily.
the map I gave you charts the site of a hallowed ruin. It is said that after sounding the hanging bell there, one's fate will be guided by the stars. To help those who fight for their purpose. Am I? Rise. Are you not?
Ymir speaks cryptically, and though his instructions are clear, his intonation is less so. He must sense our confusion too, for should we speak with him again, he'll attempt to make his intentions a bit more clear and extend to us an offer of goodwill in the process.
Is something the matter? I've given you a map to the hallowed ruin? Oh, I suppose you expect less of me. I will. Those who others, if not rather, for power.
From here, we can study a small number of glintstone sorcery. Some will be new to us, others not. But Ymir is a friend. He doesn't express any interest in seeking our head, as so many others in the land seem to. He merely presents himself as a follower of glintstone and a follower of the night sky. This, as it turns out, is something that we can ask him about.
I am a glintstone sorcerer. We study the stars. Examine life therein. We began dark, born a great frontier far across the sky. Our children divine and not sublime. None
If you've been paying close attention to the lore of Elden Ring up until this point, you may have raised an eyebrow when first hearing these words spoken by the Count. Most specifically, this line, in which he mentions that we, referring to humanity or perhaps life as a whole, were born of, quote, a great frontier across the skies. To some of you, this might sound vaguely familiar, and I would theorize that this is because what Ymir is referencing here is likely the primeval current. While we could deliberate on the exact nature of what the primeval current actually is for an entire video and then some, what we do know is that the magic which stems from it, upon which all glintstone sorcery is founded. Primeval sorcery is technically its own vein of spellcasting, as characterized by the spell's darker, clear coloration, and likewise, it has its own sect of scholars, philosophers, and visionaries. At least in the base game, though, the dichotomy between glintstone and primeval sorcerers, not only in their practices, but also in how they're viewed socially, is black and white. Primeval sorcery is by no means a popular form of study, which has caused its practitioners to attract the scrutiny of their peers. It is altogether unfounded belief that many primeval sorcerers are simply mad. To be clear, two of the foremost primeval sorcerers that we know of, Lusat and Azur, are shown to have replaced the vast majority of their bodies, including their heads and brains, with glintstone. So, we're definitely dealing with some pretty eccentric figures here, all things considered. But there's something else that Ymir states here that's also pretty important. He says that glintstone is the study of the stars. We assume that the two practices are synonymous or much of the same, but this begs the question as to what the primeval is the study of. And while the answer is not exactly dry, sorcery seems to be a study of the darkness, or the abyss, which exists in space, the birthplace of the stars themselves, theorized by many other content creators on occasion, and an interpretation which I want you to keep in mind as we move forward. But before we turn away, Ymir releases us with some hard, parting words.
Oh yes, do mind your feet. around the church. The little boy.
Okay, what does that mean? We look carefully around the church, searching for some explanation to the Count's warning, and as we do, we get a glimpse of someone leaning against a pillar on the ventral side of the cathedral. Emir's own standoffish bodyguard, with whom we can share a brief exchange.
I've no interest in talking. My only concern is the concerns of the female. Of you, on the other hand. Only, there is one thing I would say. Count Emir is kind enough to give. Should you consider it, you will sorely regret it.
Something that really sticks out about this character is her armor. It's unlike anything that we're likely to have seen at this point. Jet black, adorned with etchings of gold, a pattern that resembles the robes of Ymir himself. It's also reminiscent of the single set worn by Chloe, a character from the base game who's afflicted by madness from the frenzied flame. But clearly, frenzy is not present within the sacrosanct halls of Manus Meter, not within Ymir nor Yolan, as we learn the knight's name to be when asking the Count about her, though we do know that she has a troubled history.
You meant Yulan. Well, I hope that she behaved, at least. The poor girl has overcome grave misfortune. Her tongue can be sharp at the best of times, but don't think that makes her a bad person. It's no surprise her little sister, too, has a heart of gold.
Finally, if we proceed past Yolan into the courtyard, we find a small collection of weathered gravestones, but only one is still legible, and it reads, Yuri, beloved child, taken before his time. It would seem then that this is the boy whom Ymir bid us not to disturb before, but I don't know. His words made it seem like he was talking about somebody alive, somebody within the cathedral itself, not that we should mind disturbing some grave off to the side. It doesn't really seem to add up, but there's not a whole lot we can do about it for now. If we take a look at the map that was given to us earlier, we can match its image with an area to the east of the beautiful so that's where we're headed next. A breathtaking location speckled with lush blue flowers. It's always a pleasure to visit here, but to get to where we need to go, we have to work our way around to the beaches in the southeast before we can run up this ruin and bear witness to the great spectacle alluded to on the map, the singular ruins of Rhea. This is a vast open space, quite unlike anything we've ever seen in Elden Ring. Long, spindly, blackened fingers touched with gold jut out from the ground, as well as the nearby cliff face, making it abundantly clear what it is Yolan's armor is trying to assimilate. The monumental fingers form a series of concentric circles around a single structure in the center of the area. We have to fight past the monsters, but get there, we can see Count Ymir told us of. As we approach, an action structure will appear, and as we blow into it, a resonating sound washes over the desolate land. Once we're done, we also receive a talisman for our troubles, and its description insinuates that it hails from the time of the Earth Tree's very creation, entrenching in our minds the idea of ancient and hallowed place. In spite of its alien beauty, it probably will be best if we don't hang around for long. So instead, we make our way back to Manus Meter and report back to Ymir.
The tone of the bell has reached these ears of mine. Gracious, the starry sky is wondrous tonight indeed. Only your fate shines brighter. Now, these are for you.
Now we're given another map and something else, a talisman depicting a disembodied hand holding a glintstone.
Think nothing of it. I have made my decision to be of help. May the stars guide you evermore.
If we check the Count's shop, there will be two new glintstone sorceries for purchase. These in particular shining a white as opposed to the typical bluish hue that we are familiar with from Kalini's and Primeval Magic. What's more, we also have a new dialogue option to partake in, and though it may not seem so at first, I want you to listen very closely to what the Count says here, because as we'll find out soon, not only does this text beautifully summarize what this entire quest is really about, but it may just be one of the most important pieces of dialogue, lore-wise, in this entire game. So here is what's said if we ask Ymir about the state of the world.
I fear that you have borne witness to the whole of it. The conceits, the hypocrisy of the world built upon the Earth Tree. The folly of men. Their bitter suffering is their no hope for redemption. Sadly, it's clear there never was any hope. They were each herself. The gathered us. If the
In case it wasn't clear, essentially what the Count is saying here is that first and foremost, he understands that we have, in the course of our journey, bore witness to many of the great atrocities we commit, and moreover, this is true both but also the base crusade resulted in incalculable suffering. The divesting of Godfrey's grace caused a lot of pain as well, and of course, the shattering of the Elden Ring is very clearly something that had a lot of negative effects. These are all failures of those in the highest seat of power, bearing, at least from our perspective, very little thought for the other inhabitants of the lands between, and how the actions of the divine may affect them. So, in short, yes, Marika, a god, can cause suffering with equal facility to humans. In the second part of the monologue, though, Ymir does something interesting. He asks a hypothetical question. Is there, or is there not, any hope for redemption? It's an interesting question, and one we may have considered before, though I think the natural conclusion until now has always been that there is at least some form of hope. Really though, consider our motivations throughout the entire story thus far. We want to repair the Elden Ring, and instantiate a new age, presumably to make the world a better place. Whatever a better place is. That may mean burning it all away and starting again. But that demonstrates a question of morality, whether or not such measures are necessary in order to set the world at peace. And it's a theme that's been explored to some extent in nearly every Souls game. But in all that time, the question of whether or not such measures would even be effective isn't really explored until now. What Ymir alleges is that the follies of men have been very shortcomings which led to gathering within not only the nature of themselves, that no being, regardless of how powerful, is fully equipped to address those same problems. And in a way, it's not that hard to see where he's coming from. But by far the biggest allegation that Ymir proposes is that this flaw extends a step further than even Marika herself. For, as he makes quite clear, he believes that the two fingers are similarly inept, which is an assessment that's harder to evaluate. Though thought-provoking, we can't really put too much stock in this one, and ultimately all of this boils down to Ymир's perspective and nothing more, at least so far as we know. If we follow this dialogue, Ymir also got something to say about the Elden Ring. It mostly amounts to him just doubling down on Marika being the real source of the issues between, or at least we assume it's Marika that he's talking about at this point.
Never young Mikola saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline, his roots were higher than magic, and treasure was one that he was to renounce everything. Blame lay squarely with them.
Before moving on, we pay a quick visit to Yolan, with a bit more compassion, or at least respect, and placed some level of faith in it.
Did Count Ymir reward you? Then I see you have gained his trust, and therefore mine. I am Yolan. The night is yours now to wield.
Something interesting that I discovered is that beyond this point, if you still haven't defeated Mesmer, like I hadn't, then upon entering his arena, there will now be a summon sign for Yolan placed to the left of the hall, and she'll readily help you take down the Impaler along with any other spirit that you may have already summoned. I maintain that the only reason I defeated him on New Game Plus 6, which is the level of the save that I use for pretty much all of my Elden Ring videos, is because of Yolan's assistance here, so that was a very welcome surprise. But either way, we don't actually actually need to interact with Mesmer at all in order to complete the rest of the present questline, though we will be headed toward the Shadow Keep where he resides, just from a different angle. The second ruins map alludes to a finger ruin located here, which can be accessed by running through that tunnel located in the crossroads that we talked about earlier. Going through here takes you to the backside of the Shadow Keep, and from here there's a lot of exploring that you have to do through the church district and the storehouse, but eventually all of this will culminate in you reaching the back gate. You can proceed to the main exit if you like, where you'll find Commander Gaius. Or he rides on, will apparently quite enemies, including Radon and Mesmer, and you can find another point of interest in the Shadow Tree Palace, a large hole or perhaps a crucible of sorts. But neither of these locations is actually an objective in the Menace Mentor questline. Instead, you'll need to step into a room off to the side of the back gatehouse, a room that contains very few things except a statue of Queen Marika, which is a shadow fragment and a message. Have mercy, spirited away shamans. It's a black. We're reminded of the atrocities against the shamans in all places. We may find ourselves taking a moment to contemplate the message, to kneel at the foot of the statue, Village. Oh, mother. If we do, then we'll find that the statue slides to the side, revealing another chamber and a small path that leads out to a flowery field. The entrance is awe-inspiring, quite unlike anywhere else that we've ever been. But as we traverse the making our way, we pass some familiar faces, tree sentinels. Although they rough us up a bit, we're able to press forward, past those odd skyward-pointing fingers, and past the finger creepers and leeches, until finally reaching the second bell. Just like before, we blow into it and receive another sacred talisman, yet another job well done. But before returning to the camp, there's something else that seems to deserve a bit of investigation, and it all stems from those two enemies we passed on the way here. What are tree sentinels doing in the Land of Shadow? Sure, these guys are fairly prevalent within the base game. One of them can be right away, as soon as we enter Limgrave. It's one of the first big challenges that the Tarnished will ever hit it against. These are the only two enemies of their kind within the entire DLC, at least to my knowledge. Which makes sense, considering the tree sentinels are the protectors of the Erd Tree, not the Shadow Tree. Something in this pastoral setting is not as we touch a path which the first sentinel descends upon us from, we'll discover the biggest secret of this entire journey so far. This is Shaman Village. Upon arrival, two things should make themselves immediately apparent. First, the music which hangs in the air has changed. The echoing sound of the instruments and vocals of the Shadow Altus track have been replaced by the sparse notes of a harp. Notes that I would reckon most of you will probably recognize. But the other discovery is a golden sound that makes me feel one and the music is an information that dispels any doubts we may have had as to its origin. Its description reads, secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold, without order, creates a small illusory Erd tree that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal. This small, almost quaint little bluff is one of the only places in the game where we see buildings that are completely whole, as if the village was quietly abandoned rather than taken by force. There aren't even any additional materials or pieces of loot to be salvaged in the whole of the place, aside from one, found upon a statue within a hollowed-out tree on the southern side of the settlement, the Golden Braid. A braid of golden hair cut loose, Queen Marika's offering to the Grandmother, boosts holy damage negation by the utmost. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There is no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. So it is that after more than 2 years of driving ourselves mad with guesswork and theory crafting, we finally have come to know the origins of Queen Marika herself. Because of what we know about the Empyrean system, that some mortals, likely some of those born to divine lineages, though certainly not all, are born as potential candidates for godhood, the most that could possibly be discerned of Marika's past pre-Shadow of the Erd Tree is that she, well, must have been born an Empyrean. But now that we can access Shaman Village, the full story becomes a bit more clear. Long before the age of the Erd Tree, before the Land of Shadow and the lands between were separated, whether in space or in time, Marika was a shaman, the very same peoples persecuted by the Hornsent. At some point, her village was likely raided, and the people who lived there, her friends, her neighbors, perhaps even one or both of them, would have been taken away and stuffed in Marika, however, as we now know, was the tyranny, oppressors, and a rapid level of success. The Great Crusade towards today eventually been her devising, and being imperial, Marika would quickly attain power, of which human likely never really had. Only after entering the gates of America and thinking Godfrey as her first lord, that Marika would visit the village of leave behind the lock of her golden hair, and of course, this little trim a gesture, symbolic though it may be, of the end of her people's suffering. All of this can be pieced together from what we've learned so far, and seems almost entirely concrete in its validity. But unsurprisingly, there are also a number of implied theoretical avenues that we can explore as well, given what we now know. And one of these avenues seems like it might confirm something that many of us have speculated on way before the first ever DLC trailer was even dropped. That being that Marika may have been an Empyrean during the age of the Crucible. The age before the Erd Tree was likely dictated by a god, with Placidusax as their lord. We'll come back to him later, trust me on that. And in this age would have existed an icon of divinity called the Crucible. I briefly hinted at this earlier, but I told everybody that what we know in the physical crucible. Consider the definition of the word crucible. Most literally, it's a type of bowl or container in which metals or other substances can be melted, blended, or processed. But furthermore, take a closer look at any of the armor sets worn by the Crucible Knights, and it starts to become apparent that their symbol, the emblem which they all share and which has been right in front of our noses this whole time, really strikingly resembles a depiction of the Shadow Tree Chalice as viewed from above. Finally, keep in mind that Marika must have been an Empyrean, and accepting her, bear in mind that every other Empyrean that we know of in the game had at least one parent that was somehow connected with an age. So while the mystery of Marika's parents isn't entirely solved, far from it, the village of her birth, along with the general context of the age at the time, seems to insinuate that someone connected to divinity likely have a child with a shaman, and thus Marika was born. The second big observation to make is that owing to the persecution she would have faced as a shaman at the hands of the Hornsent, a group of people who very obviously adorn themselves with aspects of the Crucible, there may be no wonder why the Golden Order has such a profuse hatred for Crucible magic in the current age. From Marika's perspective, this was the magic of her subjugation, and it was the icon of all the carnage she would have seen growing up. Therefore, is it really any wonder that she would have turned against it, or even tried to bury it when she ascended to divinity? All in all, there can be no question that the early years of Marika's life were marked with tragedy, and in a sense, it becomes easier to understand where she may have come from during a lot of the main events first told of in the base game. The last thing that stuck out to me as I was first uncovering all of this is the way that the minor Erd Tree incantation presents itself as only the kindness of gold without order. And when you think about it, this is actually a really saddening line, because it reminds us of something that I think is often forgotten in Elden Ring lore, that being that the Golden Order was supposed to exist, at least originally, to help people, to give them hope, and to protect them from death, which I think is something that Marika truly feared, but not necessarily for selfish reasons, as many have alleged in the past. The reason that I have is simple, and I swear this is going to be the last bit of theory that I introduced for a while. First, bear in mind that before Marika's age, death almost certainly existed as a natural part of the order of the world. So, as the horn sentient is able to make living jars, it has been much more than simply stuffing corpses into pots. It's hard to tell if this is entirely true. There's probably some enchantment going on here too that technically renders it living, but the fact remains that in any meaningful way, those subjected to the practice would be effectively dead. Upon gaining control of the Elden Ring for herself, we know that Marika entrusted the Ring of Death to her shadow, Malakath, bidding her to keep it hidden, so that the perils of death would never truly be known to anyone again. That at least at the time, Marika probably saw that she was doing altruistic, but as we know, the best laid plans go often wrong, and thus the great perils of undeath are told instead. Forestalling death could have just as easily been with unforeseen consequences as a annoying and selfish one, and I would imagine that such an interpretation might also help to explain her actions during one of the most pivotal events in Elden Ring history, the Shattering. After the Night of the Black Knives, when killed none other than Marika's and after she had deliberately cast it away to prevent that, nevertheless, well, there's hardly any wonder that such an event may have simply been too much for Marika. Shattering was nothing more than a hasty act of dejection, for, as we know, Marika wasn't beyond the follies of men, spoken of by Ymir. Whether God or man, nobody can account for the great cruelties of life, and so perhaps it was that we've come to where we sit today. Now, once again, that's all just the musings of one person, and much like the words of Ymir, it has to be taken with a grain of salt. I don't know for sure what's going on in this world more than anybody else, and after all, there's a big piece of this whole failure all the way down scenario that Ymir outlines which we've neglected to talk about, mostly because I deliberately avoided it earlier. Ymir says when we ask him about the end of the world, men are flawed, as is Marika, as are the fingers, but while at least two of those things is true, that last one still seems hypocritical. This guy adorns himself in robes with fingerprints on them. He sends us to ring the bells in finger ruins, and is a glintstone sorcerer. He, more than any, must possess a level of faith or understanding in the machinations of the stars. Surely, fingers, the foremost vassals of the greater will, must be able to avoid the shortcomings of people, and if we ever want to know the truth of the matter, to Manus Meadows. Upon arrival, we proceed to the back of the church as usual, but this time, something is different. As we walk through the big iron doors, we can see Ymir is holding something before he speaks.
Oh my, you poor thing. Another bad dream, Yuri. Put that rotten thing out of your mind. That tangled mess can't hurt you.
That seems incredibly weird, so we walk over to Yolan before approaching him further, but she seems to have really warmed up to us, which is just as off-putting in its own right.
I told you once, I've no interest in companionship, but I must admit, Count Ymir did seem very pleased. Perhaps an exception is in order. Ymir is a shining star in our eyes. The only star on the black canvas. Our meeting with the Count told us that we cannot reach out to touch it, but we can hear and heed its guidance. Focus on our shared purpose. Our service, Count Ymir.
We work up the courage to finally get close enough to the Count to see what it is that he's holding, actually is. He's a finger creeper, which Ymir now knows. And upon speaking with him at last, a lot of pieces of this quest so far begin to tie themselves together.
Hello there. I heard another sound, colored by your essence. Simply exhilarating, I must say. The stars are dark tonight. But rest assured, this is no ill omen. On the contrary, I believe that this portends a magnificent starry cascade. Now, take this. My final gift to you. May you join the glimmering stars above. Oh yes. I believe I can feel it brewing. This evening is a sign of a greater night to come.
When visiting the shop, we can purchase one last spell, the Fleeting Microcosm, which is extremely interesting for reasons we'll get into shortly. But what's more is that before we go, we're given one last chance to probe Ymir's mind and get to the heart of what we're all wondering at this point. At last, the Count will discuss the fingers.
Do you recall, as I said, that Marika, the thunder were unsound? Well, the truth lies deeper still. It is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. The fingers are but unripe children, victims in their own right. We all need a mother, do we not? A new mother. A true mother who will not give birth to further malady.
Ymir has said from the beginning that, to his estimation, the fingers are as perturbed as mortal men, but it's only now that he begins to illuminate why, and of particular blame is their mother, who has apparently gone mad. And if you think about it, the Count may have actually been hinting at this all the way back when we talked to him about Mikola after ringing the first bell, but it's one of those pieces of dialogue that only really makes sense in retrospect. And so finally we get an idea of exactly what Ymir is trying to do from Menace Metter in the first place. In truth, he seeks to become the Mother of Fingers, as he puts it, a mother who will not create further malady, which I think tells us a lot about Ymir as a character, because there's a very obvious problem with this implied plan. Ymir is human, and he's not immune to follow. So far, everything he's said about the state of the world has turned out to be true, and so it seems odd that a man as outwardly respectful as he would fail to do very simple. Ymir becoming part of the solution to the world's problems completely flies in the face of the sort of absurdist stance he's thus far adopted. And to make matters worse, that's hypocritical, plain and simple, which is one of the core components of I don't want to belabor this point too much, but it can't really be overstated just how deeply the Count is of his own ideas. It's actually baffling, and it's also brilliant writing, because in spite of the fact that he's now proven himself to be a total quack, a character that's at best inconsistent and at worst idiotic, one can't deny that Ymir nevertheless still possesses immense knowledge of this world, dating all the way back to its very founding. So regardless of how weird or dangerous he may prove to be, we still want to follow through with his demands, because doing so has consistently led us to extreme discoveries, not unlike those made with regard to Queen Marika. If for no other reason than to quell our own curiosity, we have to continue to the final Finger Ruin. We're in the thick of some truly cosmic happenings now, and closer than ever to the truth behind what exactly goes on in the night sky over the lands between. So let's bid Ymir goodbye for the final time and see where all of this goes.
May you join the glimmering stars above.
When looking to the map, it becomes clear that the third and final Finger Ruin is located much closer than the previous two, directly under the cathedral in fact, and interacting with Ymir's now vacant seat, we can gain access to the deepest secrets thus far. The Finger Ruins of Mir are certainly the smallest of the ruins that we encounter, and also the most straightforward, devoid completely of leeches, really enemies of any kind, with the exception of Swordhand of Night Anna. This is an invader who will attempt to fight you as you make your way toward the Finger Bell, and while she's fairly easily defeated, there's something that just doesn't seem right about her being here. In fact, we are reminded of something Ymir spoke about a little while ago.
It's no surprise her little sister, too, has a heart of gold.
Messing with Anna seems like an absolute affront to the companionship we've only but are furthered by an item that we find nearby, the Finger Weaver's Cookbook, written by a student of the Finger Ruins. His brush with the sublime all but shatters his mind, though he is less capable enough to leave these few precious words. Well, that ought to put us at ease. And upon interacting with the third and final Finger Bell, we learn exactly what that divinity is, and what it is that Ymir has been teasing at from the very beginning. Metter is a beast quite unlike any that we've ever seen, a visage of cosmic horror on par with something like the Astels, but wholly different in appearance and the real source of the dread that stems from their presence. While the Astels are scary because, well, look at them, Metter is ominous for a different reason. It's more of the unknown, the idea that just based off of her appearance and her epithet, we know that we're dealing with a true the mother of all and the finger creepers we've witnessed all around. In fact, we can see that even now, new children are in the process of emerging from her body, both near the helix-shaped tail fingers and from the mother's stomach, forming a grotesque mass of half-birthed kin. It's harrowing to be in her presence, and she absolutely possesses the power one would expect of such a being. The first phase of the fight is difficult because in spite of Metter's vast size, she's able to quickly body the Tarnished and hurls projectiles, making it a difficult task to counter her at both close and long range. Even with the companionship of a summoned spirit, the Mother of Fingers excels at dividing her attention between foes, and with such a large form, she has no problem flicking you away as you try to take advantage of any opportunistic attacks. But the real power and alien grace of the creature is on full display within her second phase, where she reveals a microphone not unlike to the at this stage in the battle, we are in the early thick of the anomaly, and this is informed by the fact that the cosmic, Lovecraftian music of the first phase has faded away, replaced by last the bloody work is done, and the Mother of Fingers falls to our blades. A sense of quiet falls across the area. The gravity of what we've just done begins to sink in. Simply the remembrance of the fingers is all too clear for us. Quote, remembrance Metter, the Mother of Fingers, being to the Shadow Tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the alternatively can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. The Mother of all two fingers and finger creepers is in turn a magnificently gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, and the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. That's right, Metter was here even before the Elden Beast, and now we've killed her. If hell existed in Elden Ring, we'd definitely be going there. After resting for a moment in the arena, we make our way back for the fourth and final time to the cathedral, and unlike before, nobody occupies the Grand Hall, not even Yolan, but instead, the only thing that seems to change at all is that the top seat towards the hole is below. That's where everyone is?
Irreparably, such that he wishes for your death, and I must attend to the Count's concerns.
Although not a particular surprise, facing Yolan as enemies is certainly a task that we're by no means proud to undertake. Surprisingly though, the reason for which she fights is not as we probably would have expected. She makes no mention of her sister's slaying, only that we've displeased Ymir. It's almost as if she's unaware of exactly what transpired in the sanctum below. But defeating her is only the beginning.
My dear star, a fine mother. You will be.
My shining star, grant me a mother's strength. Look here, at my fingers. I will be the true mother, and I will be the only mother.
Next, Ymir himself appears in front of his throne, this time with his robes thrown open to reveal beneath a bed of fingers, as his epithet reveals his de facto ascension to the title of Mother in Metter's absence. His plan, however naive, is complete, but we can't let someone as ideologically troubled as he undertake such an important cosmic role. Better the seat be left vacant entirely than filled by a hypocrite.
Truly, I desire to be your mother.
Upon his defeat, Ymir leaves us with some final words before dropping a number of items, including his bell-bearing, an item called the Maternal Staff, and his clothing, with the most interesting of these being the High Priest hat, which reveals the past correlation between Ymir and R'hllum, before the Count apparently abandoned his allegiance to the moon, in the process, no doubt, discovering the stars and the secrets of the fingers. In a way, this makes Ymir one of the greatest scholars of Glintstone we we've had the misfortune of coming across, but in the end, he was just as disturbed and reckless as the rest. There are a few more things that need to be done to wrap up this quest in its entirety, though. If we reload the area, we'll find Yolan, this time very much depressed by her usual post. She sits upon the ground, and her words make it clear that with Ymir gone, she's lost all purpose in this world.
Count Ymir, the stars, the sky. I see them not.
From here, we have a choice. The first option is to simply abandon her, leaving her fate very much undecided. But the others each require a consumable item, the Iris of Grace or the Iris of Occlusion, respectively. Giving her the second of these irises grants you her sword and ends the quest. But the Iris of Grace seems to heal the knight's broken resolve, if only a little.
Oh, it blinds, as if our night simply never was.
Yolan will now become a summoned spirit, who we can fight alongside in any boss fight of our choosing, but there's still the matter of her sister. Across from the cathedral entrance is a location called Rabath's Rise, and although we can't go to the top of the structure by the conventional means, we are able to reach it by doing some clever jumping from the cliff face to the south of Shaman Village. If we do, we can actually find Anna's puppet body atop the tower, showing that Ymir, in all of his cruelty, used the very spirit of his loyal knight's own sister for personal gain. If we interact with the puppet while possessing the ashes of Yolan, though, we can enter Anna's spirit into the ashes, thus reuniting the two at last, and ending their stories, with some measure of peace. From here, the little boy whose entire plot seemed to be in service of, and while we never see the finger creeper he was holding again, nor do we get any further explanation about the character, paying one last visit to the gravesite near the cathedral will reward us with one final incantation, Cherishing Fingers. Quote, "A finger sorcery has come to you, a flower, the mother of fingers, surrounds the caster with a mesh of hefty fingers that ward all manner of projectiles, whether magical or physical in nature, away from the caster. Their mother, or perhaps that is truly what the mother wishes to do." So, there we have it. The most profound quest in Elden Ring is concluded. But near the end there, a lot of things happened really fast, and we weren't left with a whole lot of time to necessarily assimilate a lot of the stuff going on. In typical Elden Ring fashion, we knew that what we were taking part in was big, but getting a handle on what that means is another thing entirely. What's more, we never actually came to any sort of conclusion regarding Ymir's whole guiding philosophy. Thus far, we haven't been presented with anything beyond his own words to suggest that Metter is flawed, that she's unfit to carry out the divine bidding of the greater will, which is kind of the crux of justifying all of his actions. The only thing we know is from the Remembrance, which tells us, once again, that Metter is an ancient being, one that wholly predates the Elden Beast, which itself is a rather large revelation. But to gain any further insight on this last point, we have to visit Enya at the Round Table Hold and trade the Remembrance in for another item, the Staff of the Great Beyond, which will lead us to today's last revelation and hopefully solidify for you the reason that I think this questline is so incredibly important. Quote, "Staff fashioned from the tail fingers of Metter, the mother of fingers, and the microcosm raised aloft over the crux they form. Catalyst for casting both sorceries and incantations, the mother received signs from the greater world, from the beyond of the microcosm, despite being broken and abandoned, and waiting for another message to come." If you have any investment in the story of the game, and I imagine if you watched this far into the video, then you probably know the description of this staff should shake you to your very core. On the one hand, Metter was broken. We don't exactly know how, but the description makes it very clear, though I believe that the more important part of this dialogue comes from that second condition. She was also abandoned. The fingers failed, and resulting in Marika, and so had humanity. But the reason for that failure, perhaps not entirely, but at least in part, has been influenced by the greatest failure of all. Something so utterly incomprehensible that even he would directly face the consequence himself, and that is that the greater will itself has struck the ball too. Any information that may have been passed down from the fingers to the gods and their Elden lords has been a lie. At best, the enlightenment that Metter received and passed along to the fingers, who then passed it along to the finger readers and so on, is drastically outdated. So much so that the Greater Will may not have even been in contact with the physical world of the Lands Between for ages upon ages at this point. And what's worse is that it seems like somewhere along the line, some entities, even if not very many, began to take notice of this. Remember how earlier I talked about Placidusax, the three-headed lord of the ancient dragons who sits in his storm beyond time at Farum Azula? Well, his remembrance has been an important part of developing our whole view of Elden Ring's world pre-Golden Order for 2.5 years now. And it says, in part, that, quote, once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. And there's been a back and forth forever about whether that means a god on the level of somebody like Queen Marika or an outer god, which seems more likely based on his position, assimilating the look of the two fingers as they reach skyward in search of divine information. It's the same stance that we see the two fingers in the Round Table Hold take midway through Elden Ring's story, to which Enya says that it'll be a long time before they're responsive again. Now, both of these interactions seem to make a bit more sense, but the truth is infinitely darker than I think a lot of people were expecting. The Greater Will has abandoned us all. The reason that the two fingers, as well as Placidusax, are still left to wait may be the Greater Will itself has fled. It's hard to be sure why, or how something like that could even be possible in the first place, but nevertheless, I'm forced to believe that it's true. And it seems that what about nobody being organized, the problems that themselves really true, then even he could have imagined humanity is a mess, gods are a mess, and the outer gods are a mess as well. What is someone to do in that situation? It's exactly as Ymir put it, actually. The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. And that is why this is Elden Ring's most profound questline. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this whole thing is that I think it's the closest we've ever been to being able to fully summarize the world of Elden Ring on a macro scale. I've long wanted to create a sort of timeline video, minutely outlining each and every happening in the Lands Between, but this story and this world quickly spiral into something so vast that it's very, very hard to do something like that well, if at all. And maybe this comes across as a little bit disappointing to some people, but having gone through this quest, having made some of the major mysteries that have been plaguing my mind and the minds of many others since this game came out in 2022, I'm sure that I feel like that is really even necessary anymore. I know that sounds kind of weird to say, but when you spend a lot of time obsessing over the nuances and details of a story like this, it's easy to get sort of driven mad by all of the mystery. Given what we've talked about today, though, even if what I theorized about is wrong, or there's other ways it can be interpreted, I'm glad to at least have some kind of answer that feels satisfying, and which, as a community, we can build off of, so that maybe we can piece together the rest of what this astounding game has to offer together. With that, though, this is Averberon. I'll see you again soon. Yeah, have a good one.
Let's talk about Asmongold.
What's going on today, man?
Oh, it's about me. Let's talk about me. That's a great idea. I mean, I'm the most interesting person, so it just makes sense. Everybody talking about me, thinking about me. It does. It makes sense.
And listen, in today's upload, we're going to be talking about one of the goats and pillars of the streaming community, Asmongold. Now, just recently, he put out a YouTube upload where he kind of goes over some health issues that he's facing. And it's no secret that this guy lives a crazy lifestyle. But it looks like he's trying to turn it all around. Now, as you all know, I'm a big advocate for a clean lifestyle and a good routine. So my message to Asmon would be this. Brother, if you ever need any help, I'm one DM away. And the same.
He's a nice guy, man. It really is. I remember when Nick started doing those workout streams. I think he started them in like 2020, 2021. I always thought that was like such a good thing. Yeah, no, that's good. He's a good dude. Yeah, I always thought Nick Merckx was a good dude. I always liked him. Yeah.
Goes for you guys, man. If you ever need anything, feel free to tweet me. I'm very active. Drop a comment down below. Let's get the motivation going, man. Get in the gym, eat healthy, go for a walk, get some sunlight. And if you like today's YouTube video, don't forget to like the video, man. And enjoy the video. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Peace and love, gang. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Sunday, y'all. We have an interesting one here for you guys today, man. This is a guy who I respect greatly. I got a lot of love for him from afar. We're not great friends or anything, but we are associates, you know? And Asmongold's going to be talking about some stuff today. And we're going to go over it because I think it's important. And I think this is a big deal.
I guess I can probably just like say, I kind of don't want to hide it a whole lot. Is like, so I've been having problems recently. Like I remember the day that I ended my stream early. So I went to the emergency room that day. And because I felt like uncomfortable, like a discomfort in my chest. And so they did an EKG on me, and like they did all this stuff, and they said that I was okay, but my blood pressure was very high. And so it was like, because I've actually been like, I've had very bad stress problems a lot.
What's up, bro? I'm at the Church of LA.